Hail, hail, the Celts are here. And guys, we are here for the latest edition of the flagship podcast. Coming out of a huge derby win, Celtic beating the Baddies by 3-2 at the weekend. And we've got a very special guest joining us for the podcast this week. We've got Sky Sports News' own Anthony Joseph. Anthony, thanks a lot for joining us, mate.
Well, thanks for having me on, Quinny. It's a real pleasure to be on, and especially after a very happy weekend at the weekend.
Yeah, I think we're all smiling from ear to ear. I went to the game, Anthony, myself, and I was expecting it to be, I think we're all quite happy with coming away with the win. And ultimately, the goals we scored were all really exciting, really good quality play from us. But it wasn't maybe quite as one-way traffic as I would have maybe hoped and expected. What about you? How did you feel about the game?
Yeah, I think as a fan, I was quite confident going into it, and I don't like being confident before these games. But the last time I felt really confident was the game in September, and we won 4-0. So I was actually expecting something similar. I thought they might, with no fans, no away fans and everything like that, I thought it might be a 3-0 or perhaps even more. But no, I mean, credit to Rangers. They did come very organised and they came to play. They almost had nothing to lose, really, did they? I think even before the game, Celtic were never going to drop 10 points. Yes, it was 9, but the goal difference is huge. So the Celtic were not going to drop 10 more points than Rangers between now and the end of the season. So Rangers just had to go out there, and the pressure wasn't really on them. So they were able to come out and play and impose their game plan without the pressure. And knowing there was no away fans, the pressure was all on Celtic. They had to go out and put on a show for the fans. It was 60,000 Celtic fans there, so I was surprised at how it panned out, but also I can see the way it was, the way it developed. Beale does have this Rangers team far more organised, it does seem. And yeah, it was tight, but Celtic just found a way, and they always do find a way. And this season has just been, or even at work, I was asked to pick out like the key games this season. It's not the same, and I was asked to do this last season as well. And last season there was like last minute winners, there was some real like hard fought victories. And I guess apart from that Hearts away game, there's not really been that this season. It's been like maybe the 4-0 against Rangers, the 9-0 against Dundee United, the 1-0 at Aberdeen, that kind of thing. Those were the games I was picking out. But it's been fairly routine. Celtic have been on top for pretty much all this season, so with a huge gap. So I just feel like I don't know. There's a difference. There is still a big gap between the two teams, but the Rangers definitely look a lot more organised, and they showed that. But like I keep saying, Celtic still won the game, and that was the main thing. That's all they had to do, and that was it. They're 12 points clear, basically 13.
Yeah, I was quite impressed with how, or I wouldn't say, I don't know if impressed is maybe the word, surprised might be the one, but like you say, we weren't expecting it to be a wee bit more emphatic. We did have that extra level of confidence coming into the game, and I definitely agree that I've actually just got the 3 games we've played against Rangers in the league in front of me from like the starting 11s, and the Rangers team that we've played across the year has changed quite a bit. Obviously, there's been 2 managers in place, but I remember the first game at Celtic Park, and I was at the game for that as well, and that's the one, if you remember, where Turnbull scores the goal from the, collecting the loose ball from the goalkeeper kind of thing, and it was as if we were just taking the mickey out of them at that point. It was like when that goal went in, I don't think anyone cheered. I think the whole stadium laughed, if you know what I mean. It was one of those ones where it was like rubbing salt into the wound. And I seen on that day guys like Tillman, I'm just looking at the squad now, Sands, Barisic, Kent, Cholak. I seen a lot of those guys on that day really shrink under the atmosphere. And, surprised or credit due or whatever, but the Rangers players that showed up at the weekend, I don't really think any of them really like wilted under it as much. It feel maybe having no fans gave them a wee bit of that, they kind of knew a wee bit more that they were going to be absolutely against the stadium, and you've just got to expect a worst case scenario. But Credit where it's due from us as well. Like the goals we scored were not the only chances we created in the game, and all the subs were pretty effective without doing much. But again, Anthony, see, as I cycle through these last 3 derby matches in the league, like last time we played James Forrest, we lost Greg Taylor after 20 minutes. It was Alistair Johnston's debut. The time before that, we've started with Juranovic. It was actually quite a strong team in the first one where Turnbull gets the goal from the bench, like I mentioned. So it's point being for the game at the weekend, no Hatate, no Abada, 2 big players for us in general, whether it be from the bench or for the start. So is it a little bit of, I think that Rangers team were a bit better, but it's also still the fact that we weren't at 100% capacity as well, maybe?
Yeah, and I think it shows the difference between the 2 squads as well. Celtic's strength and depth is crazy at the moment. I think Celtic have a really strong squad. Like even the likes of Haksabanovic on the bench, you think Haksabanovic has shown he's a quality player when he comes on and the few games he started. Iwata looks like a real find as well. And he didn't even start. It was Moy who started, and he didn't have the best of games. But there was a few Celtic players who didn't have the best of games. But I think the difference between the 2 sides is Celtic have that extra quality and that extra strength and depth, but there's also the mentality side of it. So yes, I think Rangers perhaps were able to showcase more about more of their football because the pressure was off them. But Celtic, who I felt Celtic were off the boil in large parts of that game. There was a lot of slack passing. There was a lot of players caught out of position at times as well in defence. Don't think Starfelt had a great game, but the mentality that Ange has instilled in this team is the reason that they go on to win these games. And we talk about it all the time. It's become the catchphrase that they never stop. And you see that with the two goals in the second half. They picked up on loose balls. Those weren't chances unless you actually do the running or you make it a chance. They're going that extra yard to get in front or beat the man, beat Alan McGregor to the ball. Doing the hard work, it's so important, and sometimes gets overlooked when Celtic win like 4 or 5-0. But when they win 1-0 or 2-0 or up at Ross County, it's because they've done the hard work and it puts themselves in that position. And another great example, I think, of that, which shows the level that Celtic are operating in at the moment, was perhaps even the Champions League games. Celtic's performances in the Champions League games were pretty good against top-level opposition. What they lacked was quality in front of goal in the whole Champions League campaign, but they did all that hard work. They created chance after chance after chance. The finishing was just so poor. They were missing sitters. It was actually sitters they were missing. They would not, if Celtic had another Champions League group with that same level of performance in all 6 of those games, they wouldn't finish with 2 points again. Because I just think by the law of averages, if you create those chances, if you do the hard work and constantly be aggressive and relentless as they are domestically and in Europe, the goals will eventually come. And at the moment, they are coming domestically, and hopefully that can continue on into next season as well.
Yeah, I'm with you all the way on that, Anthony, because when you look at the bench, and particularly like it's what I've started referring to as like the closers in the Celtic team, the guys that come out to close the game. And that's not a defensive thing from us, it's actually an attacking thing, But if you look at that set of closers that came on for the derby at the weekend, pre-Ange Postecoglu, that would be half of the starting team. All those guys would be starters. There's no really too much about it, So the quality, as you say, it is insane, and it is a big part of it for me. We've got one of the notes for the podcast today, Anthony, like where was the game won and lost? And for me, like, and maybe Rangers fans are going to, if any of them are there and listen to this, maybe spit their cereal out when they hear this, but for me, it was the referee that made the game as tight as it was. Like being in attendance at the stadium, I couldn't believe when I left the game how much of a right they felt they had to be upset at the refereeing performance, because me being at the match, Carter Vickers was booked after 8 minutes, and then between minute 39 and 47, our full midfield got booked. McGregor, O'Reilly, and Moy. So that really changes the game state in terms of what those guys can do in the game, how they can influence the match. Moy had a really poor first half, and I think then quickly getting booked in the second half, that was just game over for him at that point, But for me, I think that also probably helped in terms of any of those. Because for me, when I was at the game, any 50-50, throw in, corner, goal kick, decision, wee thingy free kick, I don't think we got any of them on the day, and it really does paint back into the mentality that even though we've got the stadium on side and we're at home and we're running high on the league and whatever, but even in these situations in the derby, when all the wee niggly ones go against you, your main centre-back gets booked after 8 minutes. And I don't think if you asked anyone, what did they do? No one would really be able to remember. What if it wasn't a big cruncher or a set the tempo foul early in a derby match? It wasn't anything like that, It was... so for me, I think that played a big part in how the game panned out. But all the headlines, I love Kyogo. Kyogo's my man this season, right? But for me, the headlines, the difference maker was Jota.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and well, he got the winner in the end, didn't he? With that reading that bad pass back and getting onto it before Alan McGregor could get to it. But even then, once he takes it past McGregor, he's got such a tight angle to quick at the speed he's going at as well, to quickly get his left foot round that and direct it into the bottom corner, so towards goal. So yeah, Jota was set up for him. I mean, even Sky's coverage of it was all about Ellie Dixon and Ben's song. Ellie Dixon was there at the stadium as well, so it was set up for him to be the hero. And yeah, he had a good game, and he turns up in these big games. He had a really good game in the 4-0 victory as well. So yeah, Jota is just one of those talents that Celtic are very lucky to have, but also have done extremely wise business in recruiting, as they have done for a lot of these squads. I don't really like to talk too much about refereeing decisions, because I just think in general refereeing is poor across the board in Scotland. I mean, yeah. And I think that's always going to happen when you've got the Scottish Premiership is a professional league. It's in UEFA's top 10 leagues going by the coefficient. And yet we've got part-time referees. I just don't understand why that is allowed. You've got part-time referees refereeing a professional game. So I think that is the bigger issue of refereeing in Scotland. And I'm not saying that suddenly make them professional and they're going to be making amazing decisions left, right, center. Look what's happening in England right now, for example. But it helps. It helps. I mean, anyone in any walk of life will realise that if you're doing two jobs, you can't. I mean, no, people do two jobs, but if you can focus on one job, you can do it much better. If you're constantly training and learning and sort of going to training in a refereeing capacity like they do in England, that will help. But our referees are lawyers, teachers. They've got day jobs and they have to do the extra stuff themselves after their work. So I think that is the key issue. I don't believe in like there's agendas or conspiracy theories or anything like that. I just think it's poor across the board. And the biggest issue for me is that they're part-time. And in terms of the Morelos goal that Rangers are really upset about and Rangers fans keep going on about, I mean, I can see why it was given, because there was a push. So by the rules, the referee has a right to give it. I do think it was extremely soft. And I do think if that was up at the other end and it was chopped off for a Celtic goal, I think we'd all be very annoyed as well. So, I mean, I think both sides are right. Both sides of the argument are right. It was a foul, but it's very rarely given like that. But in the rules, a referee can give it. So they're not, and VAR isn't going to overrule it when the referee hasn't made a clear and obvious error, which they didn't believe he did. So
yeah, no, I'm with you all the way on that. It's very level-headed, Anthony. And like I'm thinking back, like I've got a UEFA license. I did coaching for a few years, and that was a part-time kind of thing. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, yeah, I actually could probably tie in pretty well the dips in my coaching career versus when you're overwhelmed outside of that kind of thing. So it's not really, and you hear the part-time thing all the time, but I've never really given it much thought beyond that until now. So it's a pretty good point you make. I'm kind of with you on there, particularly with the VAR element when there's a lot of technology and a lot of almost logistics involved. You know, if you are like having to get to grips with that, it's probably like something that's quite intensive. Like the guys that are down south in England that you'll be closer to, as well as the guys in the top 5 leagues in the world, like they undoubtedly will be playing with those toys and getting to know those systems every day of their working life because they're professional, as you say, you know. So yeah, it doesn't guarantee you know, a wild difference, but it definitely increases your chances of a better standard for sure. I'm with you.
Yeah, I think it's just it is quite obvious just from a almost like a human level, isn't it? That if you have your day job and you are working towards that, you're analysing your own performances throughout the day, like referees do, they get their rest days and everything like that. Like footballers, referees in the top 5 leagues are treated like, or go about their business like anyone else that plays the game. So I just feel like it really holds Scottish football back, that it's a professional game with part-time referees. So I'm not sure how quickly that's going to change. It probably is to do with money. So, but I think it is something that would go a long way to helping solve the problem and increase the quality of refereeing, and probably also increase the breadth of talent that is probably out there that people just, because it's not a full-time job, wouldn't go into.
Yeah, agreed. Because again, like, yeah, the people that go into it now, like, yeah, they have to be able to afford to do both. You know, it's not something people could undertake as something they wanted to go after. You know, ideally that's what you're after, somebody that would give their all to it. And yeah, so I'm with you all the way on that. In terms of like, from the match itself, like I said, that was just in terms of the refereeing, that was my main kind of thing about it. I just couldn't believe how crazy Rangers fans were taking it, in terms of like they felt absolutely robbed on all levels. I see, because I was at the game, and I was at the game with people that aren't, you know, biased in this match, and they were saying that referee gave everything to the blue team all day. You know, so it's just it was an odd one for me.
I think Rangers seem to be going through the stages of grief at the moment. I tweeted something after the game just about how like Celtic were off the boil. Rangers put everything into that. They played well, and they still lost. And I wasn't trying to take the mick out of Rangers. I was just saying that can damage mentality big time. When you put everything into something and you feel like you are level with these guys who are going on to be champions, and there's a 12-point gap, there's to then, and having lost the final just over a month ago as well, that can damage mentality big time. So it'll be interesting to see how they come up. Or it could turn the other way. They could feel fired up for the semi-final and give that a real contest, which is also a possibility. But I think that really hurt them, that losing that game, because they put everything into that and they did actually play well. And I mean that they're going through this sort of publicly through their fans, their fan media, and also as the club in terms of writing to the SFA, claiming handballs that weren't handballs, with players putting on Instagram that Celtic didn't win the game, Rangers lost it. I mean, what we're seeing is denial and anger stage at the moment. At some point, I mean, if Celtic go on and beat them in the semi-final, like enough to get to the acceptance stage to then build for next season.
I look forward to seeing that.
Yeah,
you called it. We probably will, because like I'm starting to hear like from what you're saying there about Cantwell as well. Like my favourite part about the whole social, when you said the stages of grief, the first thing that popped into my mind was the Paddy Power fan denial. I don't know if you've seen the one they done after the derby. It was all timer. Oh, it's an old timer. You need to catch it.
They are usually good though.
They get the letter into the SFA and everything. It's absolutely brilliant. But yeah, so like I'm quite with you on that, and I do think that the mentality from our team is only going to, you know, like guys were coming into this game like O'Reilly, maybe not got the full like, is O'Reilly off it? Should he be starting this game? And then I know Starfelt's maybe had mixed opinion throughout the season, as is Daizen Maeda. So I did feel like even for our guys continually coming through this, and that's kind of the reason I brought the point up of the bookings we carried, because getting into the halfway through the game and your midfield and your main centre back are like handcuffed in that sense, you know. it puts a lot of pressure on these other guys in the team. Alistair Johnston very firmly lifted himself to the top, cream rises to the top kind of thing in that match, and that was there for all to see. But I was quite impressed with O'Reilly in the game. I don't think he gave anything away. I don't think he was second to anything, and I think he performed pretty well. So I do feel that for everything that's amazing at Celtic, like all these victories for us, like you mentioned earlier, Anthony, when you go back to the Champions League campaign, perhaps, and like some of the opportunities we missed, that would have really hurt our mentality and confidence for a while. And now, not only I would say is that repaired, but it's probably like enhancing and growing at this stage. So I can imagine us rocking into the semi-final with, Hatate back in the team, more than likely, Abada available for selection, which is always going to just improve our chances through 90 minutes or even beyond that, because it will be a semi-final, And potentially, if we put them into the acceptance phase in the semi-final, what phase do we go into after that, where it is like, right, because we were expecting a scudding at the weekend. We were expecting to go out and run them. And maybe the absence of Hatate and a wee bit of that firepower from the bench and Abada took a bit of the edge off the game. But if we get that result in the semi-final and we finish this season with, the success that we're likely to get, where does that put us? Cloud9 is definitely what it feels like, eh?
Yeah, and Celtic this season are on course to break all sorts of records domestically, and a treble would just top it off. I know if they win the semi-final, they've got to win the final as well, but you back Celtic to do that the way they're going domestically, and it was hard to picture when Ange was standing at Celtic Park on the last day of the season last season and saying, "We're coming." I mean, everyone loved it when he says, we're going to come back bigger, stronger, because we never stop next season. And everyone loved that. Everyone's having a good time. The league trophy's been lifted at Celtic Park. But it's happened. It's happening. And that's great. And it's great to see. And we always wondered perhaps where Celtic were sitting in Europe. I think the performance has suggested that there's signs of progress, and there is, despite only taking 2 points from the group. I think the performances showed that this Celtic team can compete and it can play the way they want to play in Europe. Europa League might have been a better starting point for Celtic this season, but to see what level they were really at. But they learned a harsh lesson, and I just hope that Ange is still there. I think he'll want another crack at the Champions League, and that's in terms of the fans, we'll be on cloud9, but I really think Ange will be just be like, well, right, we've won the treble. We need to go and make a mark on the Champions League next season. That's our aim. Obviously, winning the league again, but that really needs to be the focus next season, to really put Celtic back in amongst that kind of European level and
where we belong.
Where the club belongs in terms of its stature. Of course, it does. But in terms of its playing style and in terms of the quality, it's been missing for years. But this team, if it can stay together and if they can add some more quality in the summer, I think there's a lot to be hopeful for.
One of the conversations that I see running around all across social media now is Kyogo. Is he the best since Larsson? Is he better than even than Dembele or Edouard? Where does he rank in like the new millennium Celtic heroes that we've had? And for me, Kyogo, I think he is on the pitch. He's the closest thing I've seen in terms of what he does to the fans, what he does to the game. Since we've seen Henrik, for me. Do you weigh in on any of that, Anthony? How do you feel about the Celtic strikers we've had over the last 20 years?
Yeah, it just depends how you judge a striker. Do you just judge them purely on goals? Do you judge them on their overall ability? But I guess in terms of style, Larsson probably a bit better in the air than Kyogo, but in terms of their playing style on the ground and movement and runs and link-up play, they are quite similar in that sense. I don't think he's there yet, but he's heading that way. I think you've got to do, before we can make bold statements like he's the best striker since Larsson, or I think we've got to see that over a number of seasons, like 2 or 3 seasons at least. And Kyogo missed quite a lot last season as well. But I know And we all know strikers get judged on goals in particular, because in the pub or on podcasts and things like that, we can talk about the nuances. We can talk about, oh, his movement was better than Edwards, or Dembele's, that kind of thing. But goals is the main thing. And I did have a look at this actually, and he's averaging around 0.65 goals per game. And in context, Hooper was 0.59, Dembele was 0.54, McDonald 0.5, and Edward was 0.49. And then if you want to add Griffiths in there, he's 0.47. So he is averaging better than all of those strikers that in the modern era we've been looking to try and replicate what Larsson has been doing. And that's all less than Larsson's 0.81 goals per game over 7 years, averaging 0.81 goals per game. That's incredible.
That is frightening, isn't it?
But the reason I say it needs to be a prolonged period is because the likes of Robbie Keane is better than Larsson, 0.84. And he had a great 6 months at Celtic, and perhaps if he did stay, he would be up there as well. I think Edward the season before it got suspended, the league got suspended for COVID. He was in incredible form that season. Celtic finished top of the Europa League group, beating Lazio home and away. That he was brilliant. And I think had the season not been suspended and had the next season not been just in front of no fans at all, things might have been different for him, and he might have even found a better club than Crystal Palace in the Premier League. But yeah, it's just the way it goes. I think Edward was the closest so far that we've had to coming to Henrik Larsson. But Kyogo he's got to do it for a bit longer. But he's definitely heading that way. And I think in terms of style, like I was saying, apart from maybe aerial ability, definitely with the ball at his feet and the movement and his link-up play, it is very similar to Larsson. And let's just hope he stays, not just for Celtic, but just to have that talent in Scottish football. I think it's criminal that he is not in the Japanese squad though, and he hasn't been picked for the last 6. I couldn't believe that he wasn't at the World Cup, and I can't believe he's not been picked for the latest internationals as well, and Hatate too. But I'm sure we'll get onto that. But Kyogo, you just have him, even if you're the Japanese manager and you don't see him as your best striker. And I can't possibly pretend that I know everything about the Japanese squad, even though I think there's probably 5 players that I would recommend to be in that squad. And I can see why Maida's in there because he offers something completely different. But I just don't see how you can leave out Kyogo, because he'll score goals. He'll come on, even if you put him on the last 20 minutes. He's someone who's averaging 0.65 goals per game. And you saw even in the Europa League last year, he was scoring. So even if the Japanese manager who has made a few comments about the standard of the Scottish League, I think he's shown enough in Europe already that he should be in these squads. But that's not up to us. If he's scoring goals for Celtic as Celtic fans, that's all you can ask for. And but you do wonder whether for the likes of Hatate and Kyogo, if they're playing so well for Celtic, doing what they need to do here, and they're not getting picked for their country, does it make them think, well, I need to move somewhere where I'm going to get picked for my country? I need to go to the Bundesliga, I need to go to Serie A, or even lower end Premier League, mid-table Premier League, just so I can be in a league where my national team manager rates it, so I get picked for my country. That's I think is the fear of them doing so well here and not getting picked for the Japan. It's great to say, oh well, they're not doing the travelling, it keeps them focused on Celtic and that. But as a player, and these guys do seem very patriotic, they want to be picked for their country. So them missing out on the World Cup would have been a huge blow. And Ange said it was. Ange did say it was a blow for them both. So, but they just need to knuckle down. But you do wonder how long can they continue to not be picked for the Japanese squad before they think, well, actually, I'm going to need to move there. And especially Kyogo, who's 28. So, don't want to put a downer on him, his form being so good, but it does, in the back of my mind, it makes me think that anyway.
Yeah. And I'm maybe a wee bit closer to the Japanese team in terms of some of the players that are in there and all the rest of it. But for me, Kyogo is I would agree. He's the best centre forward that they could call upon. And there are some guys that knock about the Bundesliga. Obviously, Matoma is doing great. He's obviously not a striker. They do have good quality in there. But yeah, I'm totally with you on that respect. He definitely needs to do it in terms of for us and the Larsson stuff or whatever. Definitely on a European, it's probably one of the things that Edouard and Dembele have got firmly locked in their Celtic history is they impacted the European stage, to an extent. And Kyogo will probably be looking to do that because we're talking about missing chances in the Champions League. It was really Kyogo that was missing them, So is it maybe the Scottish chances or maybe the Japanese manager maybe looks at the Champions League games and thinks, well, how can I use you in a World Cup when you can't do it in a champion? Maybe that was part of it. Who knows? I don't worry too much about Kyogo not getting selected and maybe getting itchy feet to move away. I would worry more for Hatate in that sense, but I think Hatate, he's the same age as Matoma, and there's a lot of guys in that Japanese squad that are in the same class, if you like, same age range, and they're all getting picked and they're all in top 5 leagues in Europe, etc. So I would see Hatate maybe more being tempted or maybe a bit more in a rush maybe to achieve that, But yeah, so I don't know. Kyogo, when I seen that wee documentary of him seeing him not getting selected again, it feels like he's just more kind of like the coach has decided I could be playing anywhere. The coach would be, it's the coach's decision because there's also guys in that Japanese team, I don't mind telling you, that are in the Austrian Bundesliga and in Bundesliga 2 in Germany and then small teams in Portugal, not the big 3, So the standards of Scottish football thing, I don't know if it's really the reason, to be honest with you. It might be an easy one for him to use as a throwaway comment or something. But for Kyogo, that's how I feel. For Rio, I think it is maybe a danger, like you say, Just to throw my kind of 2 cents against the Kyogo and Larsson thing, I think it is probably the closest thing we've had since then. I would put him ahead just on what he does on the pitch. I would put him just ahead of Musa and Eddie personally, because I just think both of them were liable for going missing for a month or 2 here and there. And I don't really see that from Kyogo myself. So I just wanted to throw that in there. But yeah, and I think as well, talking about the international stage and all the rest of it, obviously we just sold Josip Juranovic and Jackie Makis in the summer there. And certainly for Josip Juranovic, his international footprints are definitely what helped us get some sort of fee and kind of maybe move him on in a profitable situation. With Kyogo and with Hatate, but I don't know if we really need to rely on the international credentials to maybe boost a fee or anything, because again, maybe some clubs would look at that as a benefit, that they're not going to do the travelling and whatever, and maybe clubs for a selfish reason maybe see them as more appealing. But I would hope, I would definitely hope that we're going to see Kyogo in the hoops for another 3 or 4 seasons at least and maintain that goals per game that we've got.
Yeah, and he seems to be loving it, doesn't he? I mean, just look at the end of every game that Celtic win, he leads the sort of 9 toes chant at the end, doesn't he? So, I mean, that doesn't mean he's definitely going to stay, but I mean, even the way Ange talks about Kyogo, he does seem quite relaxed, and yeah, the way I think you're right, the way you've explained the difference between Hatate and Kyogo there. He very much is bought into the whole thing. Kyogo's definitely bought into the whole thing of Celtic and Celtic as a club. And I remember speaking about it on, I think it was on this podcast at the end of last season, just explaining the difference that the fans make to the whole Celtic experience and players we perhaps brought in the COVID season, like Barkas and Ayeti, and who were living in hotels and lockdowns. The rest of the world was in lockdown, but they could still go to work and play football in front of nobody. They wouldn't have got the Celtic experience. They're playing against, they're going up to Ross County, going up to, no disrespect, like other clubs in Scotland, into empty grounds, and not getting the whole Champions League, Europa League, sort of 60,000 fans adoring you. Shane Duffy, I think, really perhaps might have had a different kind of spell had Shane Duffy been in front of 60,000 Celtic fans absolutely adoring him. That the current Island captain was at the heart of the Celtic defence. going into what could have been a 10 in a row season. I think the whole dynamic of that season might have been different in general, but I think the experience the new signings were brought in that period compared to the new signings that are brought in now, and even last season. It's just that's the whole part of Celtic. Like, players like I call out perhaps outsiders who aren't like Scottish or Irish or don't have the sort of Celtic upbringing. They need that, I think, because the Scottish Premiership is not the sell. For example, players don't go to, say, like Southampton or Crystal Palace to play for a club like Southampton or Crystal Palace. They go to play in the Premier League. True. For players coming to Celtic, they come to play for Celtic because it's the pool of the club. They don't come to play in the Scottish Premiership. That's not their dream. Let's be honest about it. They come for the experience. People know that the fan base is one of the best in the world. It's one of the most passionate. That's what they come for. They come for the Champions League experience and the whole culture of the club. And I think I remember saying that if we ever want to make a pitch, I'm sure Ange does it so very well when he calls up players that are wanting to come. I think Joe Hart's talked about it, and other players have talked about it when Ange calls them, and Aaron Moy was talking about it as well. Just show them that first half of the Celtic 3, Rangers 0 in February last year. Just show them that. Yeah. And I think many players would have their mind made up, because that's the pulling power, and that's what Celtic need to get players to decide not to go to the top end English Championship or lower end English Premier League or a mid-table Bundesliga club, which the likes of Kyogo and that could have done. And so I think that's really important, and it's the difference of whether player stays, and it makes a huge difference on their whole experience of being at Celtic.
Yeah, big time. And one player that's definitely, as you're talking there, the person that embodies that right now for me is Alistair Johnston, man of the match at the weekend. But he feels like he was made in a lab to be a Celtic player, doesn't he? Like he doesn't take any crap. He's there to everything, doesn't make any mistakes. And, you know, I don't know if it's the whole Canadian thing and we know a little bit about his background, but when I see him on a pitch, I just see an ice hockey player going around there. You know, he's just smashing into people. Nothing's a foul. Everything's fine. Give me the ball, you know, and I'll cover the whole pitch. I'll run on my skates, you know, and he'll fly up the wing and he'll track back and he'll do a bit of everything. And he's been a real breath of fresh air into the squad, you know, and as much as like right backs have been pretty important, you know, we were just talking about Juranovic, Ralston's been pretty important under Ange. It feels like Alistair Johnston really is like the complete package in this team. And it's not just what he does on the pitch, but again, it's like you say, it's that experience. You know, I was in the number 7 restaurant and the man of the match comes in and does a little speech afterwards. You've probably seen the videos. They went everywhere, but he's got his wee bottle of whiskey after the game and he's like giving it large, and, you know, he's just totally bought in, and it makes such a big difference, doesn't it?
He did the exact same. I was at the cup final in corporate with the prawn sandwich brigade, but he did that after the cup final as well. He came out with he came out with the trophy into the Kerrydale suite, brought it onto the stage, and gave a little speech about how he's just overwhelmed at how passionate the fans were and everything like that. And he was saying, this is not the first trophy, there'll be more, and things like that. He didn't need to do that. But he was the one that decided he would come up to the Kerrydale suite and show off the trophy and give us a little chat about how it was for him. So I think he's very much loving it. You could tell even at the World Cup, he actually answered about being linked with Celtic. He couldn't take the smile off his face when he was talking about speaking to Wanyama and being linked with Celtic. He knew that it was quite at an advanced stage by that point. So he was, but it still wasn't over the line, but he couldn't hide his excitement in joining Celtic. And that's exactly what I mean about a player wanting to come into the sort of and embrace the whole experience of a club like Celtic. And like you say, he perfectly embodies that of a new signing, and he's completely bought into it. And you'd hope that he can stay around for a few years at least.
Big time. And already he's only been here 5 minutes, but he's already beat Rangers twice and had a draw with them on his debut, So, talk about taking to that duck to water, eh?
Yeah, I don't think Juranovic, how well he did. Juranovic was a great player. There's no doubt about that. And he had an amazing World Cup, was even in the World Cup team of the tournament as the best right back there. It's just shows there's so much credit has to go into Celtic's planning and recruitment on this, because they're getting it spot on almost every time at the moment. That to have a ready-made replacement in before you've even got rid of the World Cup's best right back in your squad, it just shows everything about the way Ange is overseeing this whole operation at the moment.
Big time.
And Celtic are completely benefiting from that.
I think it's went on to show in the kind of fullness of time that we've had, Anthony, like how ruthless Celtic were. Because I heard quotes from Juranovic saying Celtic made no attempts to keep him. Obviously, he was on a long contract, but he found out. He's like, I found out they signed Alistair Johnston. And I'm like, hold on a minute, So I think Celtic have been so ruthless in the sense that they've identified AJ, and obviously there's the obvious transfer position of maximum opportunity with Juranovic, his age, the World Cup exposure, etc. But it's been that absolutely ruthless clinical. We've actually ID'd somebody who we believe could be just as good, hopefully better. And this guy's prime and ready to go on the market. Let's not mess about. Let's not get sentimental about it. You're going. We've signed this guy already, and let's just do it and make it happen. Because so often before, if you think about the seasons you referenced earlier, we're talking about Edward and the stadium closures and whatever. Some of those guys were like, they were told to stay on, were asked to stay on, were begged to stay on for one more season and all the rest of it. And whereas with this, it's like Celtic are just making clinical decisions. This is the best thing for us. It's time for you to go and it's time for you to come in, kind of thing. And I think that's probably all down to Ange more than anything, as being that this is the way to go and this is the way to move forward.
Yeah, it's ruthless, but it seems to be working. And as soon as Juranovic hints at perhaps not signing improved terms and wanting to go to one of the top 5 leagues, then Ange's obviously, it seems like he's gone, well, okay, you find a club, we'll get a replacement. Same with Giakoumakis. Giakoumakis hinting that he wanted to be a starter, wasn't getting as much game time, perhaps wanting to move if he wasn't going to get that game time. So Ange said, okay, you find a club, we'll get a replacement. And they brought and Johnston in before Juranovic and Giakoumakis had even gone. So it's just we're just not used to it. As Celtic fans, we're not used to it. That kind of preemptive thinking or that planning before before a player is even gone, you've got their replacement in. That is just it's working so well at the moment, and it's so refreshing to see. And even though we've had what, about 18 months, nearly a couple of years of it now, it's still surprising to see the Celtic work so hard on their recruitment and having ready-made replacements, but even ready-made replacements for missing out on targets. Celtic were meant to sign Riley McGree, who went to Middlesbrough. He decides last-minute change. He had verbally agreed to join Celtic, but then he decided, I think we might get into the Premier League with Middlesbrough. So he's gone to Middlesbrough. Celtic next day go to the next target and get Matt O'Reilly in, who's turned out to be an amazing signing at 1.2 million. And that kind of, it's been a real shift of how Celtic have operated over the last 10 years to what they're doing just now. And it's very refreshing to see.
Yeah, it's like we've finally caught up to the modern way of transfer business and football business in that sense, because I'm still I'm still scarred to my core of that window where we signed Skepovic on the last minute of the window, and all this kind of haphazard, what agents phoning the club that's got a player available to move to Glasgow on a plane tonight, kind of stuff that's all gone. And it's, as you say, it's proper planning, professional, clinical, And it kind of does bring us on to probably the last point of the team, really, because they scored a great free kick at the weekend, and I'm not going to take that away from them, because if a player in green and white scores that free kick, we're watching replays for a while, right? Good free kick and all the rest of it. I would like my goalkeeper to save that, personally. But Joe Hart's been a huge part of the team, on the pitch, off the pitch, and everything in between, I guess. But is that maybe one of the last pieces of the pitch that Ange is yet to select his guy for? Is maybe Siegrist his guy? Does Joe Hart get another season? Do we get another goalkeeper in this summer? What do you think about any of that, Anthony?
Yeah, and what happens with Scott Bain and Connor Hazard, who signed on a long-term contract?
Hazard, yeah,
as well. Well, yeah, it's certainly something Celtic need to look at, and I have absolutely. We've just been talking about how they've been planning ahead so much. There's no doubt that if we can see that's something that is perhaps going to be an issue in a year or two, then they can, certainly under Ange's leadership. So I'm not sure. I think Joe Hart will still be number one next season. I think they're perhaps not looking to bring someone in the summer. This is just my own opinion. It's not based on any info. I think what they'll be doing is identifying targets who will probably try to battle it out for the number one spot, maybe in the next couple of years, maybe not next season, but the season after. So whether that means bringing someone in and putting them out on loan, or just waiting to see who are the up and coming keepers who would battle out in a couple of years to be Celtic's number one. And I mean, if there's anything I've learned from working on transfer desks at Sky Sports News, is that clubs do get desperate, so it is something they need to address, and I think it'll be quite high up on their priority list for certainly in terms of identifying targets. We don't know if Siegrist is good enough to be number one. He's not had enough chances. He could be Joe Hart's replacement. I'd be very surprised if Scott Bain becomes that, or I can just see him moving away. So perhaps Celtic do need to bring a goalkeeper in the summer if Scott Bain leaves. And then you've also got Connor Hazard, who was on loan at Helsinki, was it?
Yep.
So who's on a long-term contract, has had a very interesting Celtic career already, being the hero goalkeeper of the quadruple treble. And then goalkeepers are in their prime later in their 20s and early into their 30s. So it's always a hard position to work out whether someone's going to be a good number one, especially if it's very rare you go and get like a 21-year-old goalkeeper who's going to be your number one for the next 5-6 years. So it'll be interesting to see who those targets will be and when Celtic decide to bring them in, or if they see Siegrist as the ready-made replacement for Joe Hart whenever he decides to hang up his boots or leave Celtic, and they bring in a young goalkeeper, send them out on loan to build up to being Celtic's number one in the next 3 or 4, 5 years. That kind of planning for me also. We talked about how well it's going under Ange and Ange's leadership. And Celtic are doing things in a modern way, but they still don't have that modern structure. I think Celtic need a sporting director, because Celtic need to think about life after Ange. And I know we don't want to think about life after Ange, but Ange is almost all-encompassing in an old school type of managerial structure where he is very much in charge of everything. And he's definitely not an old school manager, but Celtic as a club, if they want to model themselves and be a consistent team challenging and competing in Europe, like perhaps clubs in this, not in the top 5 leagues like Benfica and Ajax, they've got to work to that kind of model and sell direct to the elite. And they need a sporting director who's not just thinking about who's your next manager. They're thinking about who's the manager after that. Who are your signing targets after you've got your next striker in? That they've got to be thinking for the next 10 years, 7 to 10 years, I would say a sporting director needs to be doing. And that's what a modern structure, most well-organised European clubs have that structure in place, and just under different names, whether it's chief football officer or sporting director or director of football. They do, because you need someone above the manager who's planning for after that manager. And as much as Celtic fans are enjoying this period, that is, I think, quite a serious point that Celtic need to look at, and hopefully they are, as to what happens after Ange, because he is very much in charge of not just picking the first 11, he's in charge of everything in the football department at the moment. And it's going to be interesting to see what direction they're going, because Don Mackay wanted to go in that direction. Don Mackay was wanting to he talked about that. He talked about being a more modern European club and bringing in that kind of structure. He was wanting to bring in a director of football, sporting director. We know that they were looking at Fergal Harkin, who's now sporting director at Ronnie Dyler's club, Standard Liège. But that was through the Manchester City connection, because he was Manchester City's pathways manager at the time. So whether they use someone, I know Mark Lawl's in as well, so they've got people within the structure that could take on more responsibility when Ange goes. But I do feel they need a sporting director.
Yeah, I would agree with you. That was one thing that really it drove home to me when Rodgers left for Leicester. I forget the number. I'm sure somebody in the comments will be able to catch it. Maybe you know it, Anthony. But when Rodgers left, he took like 12 members of staff with him or something. Mm. And then when we hired Lennon to come in and replace him, it was like Lennon, Kennedy, and Little Strachan, if you know what I mean. And it was like he's taken a Premier League football department down to Leicester, out of Celtic, and we were quite vulnerable to that. So you would hope the club have learned their lesson, and in the event, Ange Postecoglu is not eternal, so like in the eventuality of when he's not at the club anymore, you don't want to be exposed to that undoing, the wheels falling off the cart at that point, as it were.
That's actually, it's a great point about staff. So a sporting director wouldn't just be looking at recruiting players and coaches and managers. They'd be looking at who's our sports science man or woman going to be, who's the well-being manager going to be, that kind of thing. All the different aspects of a football club now. That they need all the top European clubs have these structures in place, and I just feel like this is Celtic have something that's working at the moment. The longevity of it is not going to be there, because at some point Ange will leave. And whether that's in 4 years' time or whether that's in 2 years' time, but that planning needs to be in place of what direction they want to go in as a modern European club, especially as talk is changing of structures to the Champions League. Champions League structure is going to change. European football might be a completely different place in the next 10 years in terms of domestic leagues as well. So Celtic need to keep up, not only keep up, but be in line with the curve.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And there's probably a few tangents I would love to slide down on that note, as well. Just one thing I would throw into that in terms of any modernisation and whatever. I don't know where it's at now, because it was announced pre-pandemic and whatever, but there was I'm pretty sure it was 95% agreed that the Dutch and the Belgian league were going to amalgamate into what was going to be called that BNE league or something. I don't know where that's at now or whatever, but there's definitely a lot of plans afoot, and Celtic definitely want to be at the cutting edge of. So I think we have kind of suffered over the last 20 years for not transitioning into the modern world, and however that's kind of happened or not happened, financial, personnel, motivation, it could be a number of things, but we definitely don't want to miss any boats that are coming up, because I do make you right, Anthony. There's the world of football over the last 20 years has went through an industrial revolution in terms of how the game's followed, how it's played, how it's all the stuff you're talking about, staff, well-being, pathways, and all this stuff. It's a totally different world in that sense, and it feels like it's a bit of Ange Postecoglu's world at the moment. The quote you gave us earlier, we'll come back bigger, better, because we never stop. Last season, our record was 93 points after 38 games. So far, this season, after 31 games played, Anthony, we've got 88 points and locked in already. The team are on track. They could beat Brendan Rodgers' total, the Invincible team got, of 106 points if we were to do the job. It's obviously we're not invincible. We've picked up a loss this season. Goal difference is just running away crazy. But it's like you said, it was hard to believe, how can this team come back bigger and stronger? And like already we're squishing the record that the manager had in his first season. So it is all going in a great direction, and that's when the club should be building, is in that position of strength. When it is going from better season to better season. And yeah, I think as long as the club kind of keeps that kind of forward thinking on, should be good.
Yeah, and going back to that Ange's record, we were told this was going to happen. All the experts in Australia, all the experts in Asia, all the experts in Japan, they were telling us that this guy is different. He is a top manager, and it's relentless in terms of his hard work and what he demands of a team. And I remember tweeting after Celtic lost 4-0 to Bayer Leverkusen, just saying that perhaps Ange needs to be a bit more streetwise in Europe, because the relentless football, we're starting to see signs of this good attacking football at that point, and then suddenly they take a battering off Leverkusen at home. And I remember I got quite a few replies from journalists in Japan and Australia just saying he won't. He will just make what they do now better. That's all he's going to do. And that's what he's doing. I mean, we were told this, and I know the Scottish media and British media perhaps were, when he came in, were naive or perhaps even ignorant on what he was going to do. But that's and his knowledge of the Scottish game. He doesn't need to know too much Scottish football. He does know plenty. He did know about Scottish football, and it's mental to think that you need to have been brought up in Scottish football to do well in Scottish football. Look at the top players that have played the game in Scottish football, like Larsson and that. He wasn't brought up in Scottish football, and the top managers as well. So it's incredible that was the narrative here, but in Asia and Australasia, they kept telling us, they were telling, this guy is going to be incredible, and it's just going to be fascinating to see how he does in Europe. And he's doing that. He had he worked wonders last season in terms of the overhaul of the squad and turning that into a winning machine, but also not just a winning machine, but a team that was playing amazing football to win the title back. And then to go on this season and to be on course to perhaps win a treble. He's got 2 in the bag. Well, hasn't got the league in the bag yet, but he's going to win the league. And to perhaps even break records that were broken in what we thought was unprecedented success of a Celtic period under Rodgers, with invincibility, to perhaps be better than the Invincibles without being an invincible takes some doing. And it just will always, I'll never forget the amount of just the passion that the Australian journalists and the Asian journalists were saying that this guy is something else, and he's really special, and he's going. We were warned, we were told, and he's delivering. It's really good to see.
A lot of those shouts were season 2 is where it happens, but I'm now starting. We got excited earlier on in the podcast, Anthony, but I'm now thinking season 2 was all right, but I think season 3 is going to be really where the party's at.
Yeah.
Because we're only really in that ascendancy point where we're really chuffed with the team. Oh, don't get me wrong, we've been chuffed with the team all season, don't get me wrong, but that real season 2 cutting edge that we're seeing, we've only really had that maybe for about a month or 2 since the World Cup, maybe at that push. And Ange obviously wants the team to peak second half of the season. We know all this stuff already, of course, but that just gets me excited for another season. Hatate should be better next season. Jota should be better. Carter Vickers, Kyogo, Alistair Johnston will be starting the season. Alistair Johnston will be playing in Europe, So I think season 3 is definitely, something that we didn't really pay much thought to when we're hearing all this stuff about season 2. Right, okay, well, let's judge the guy. Let's see how much we kick on. And when you look at the numbers now, like I say, last season, after 38 games, we scored 92 goals. Already, after 31 games played, we've scored 98. So the goals we're putting away is just... And we've only had one really big result, the Dundee United one, the 9-0. Every other game, I don't think we've broken 4 goals, really.
Yeah.
So it's just every team. We're just 2-3-4 every game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, And what you're saying about, because Ange talked about it when he said this after last season, said that was just phase one. This next is phase two, and I remember thinking that, well, that's quite exciting to hear that what he's done in phase one was quite remarkable. What's phase two going to be like? And it has been good. And I think, yeah, phase three has got to be quite European centric, and what impact they can have in the Champions League, and if they drop down into Europa from a Champions League group, what can they do in the Europa League? So that, I think a lot of his time and attention will be, because he knows as well about how he's being judged in the outside world. Yes, because the outside world does think, and I know it even just living down here, and even amongst my colleagues who don't follow Scottish football that much, apart from Celtic and Rangers, and they think, oh well, you can win. It's easy winning with Celtic, isn't it? It is.
It's a formality.
That's what he said. I'm not saying it is. It's
no.
They're saying it is, and they don't realise that the pressures, the work you have to do to continuously be at the top, because so many managers have failed, so many players have flopped at Celtic because they can't handle it, and at Rangers as well. It's the very much in the outside world, he's going to be judged more so on what he can do in Europe, and it is going to come down to results. I think there's promise being shown with the performances, because he's already been looked at. He's already on the list on the short lists of clubs like Spurs for their next manager, and then obviously clubs like Brighton had looked at Southampton and Leeds. I'm sure would be looking at him as well. But I think, Leicester as well. But I think what would really make him go from like being on the short list of a Leicester or Spurs to perhaps even higher, I really think Spurs might be one. If Spurs came in, that he would think about that. But perhaps I don't know.
He's probably one of the only guys in world football that would actually be happy with the Tottenham transfer budget. You know, he could go to Japan and buy the whole division if he wanted. You know,
he's a project manager though, isn't he? So I think he would think that there's a lot of potential that Spurs as a club outside of the football are growing, but the football department is very much a shambles at the moment. I don't know. I just feel like Spurs as a club might have a bit of pulling power. I don't think he would go in the summer to a Leicester or Leeds or Southampton. I've now said this on camera, so I just really hope it's not going to happen now. But I think it'll be interesting to see if he wins the treble. He'll very much. I think Ange is thinking that it would be have another crack. I need to have a crack at the Champions League. I need to do something with Celtic in the Champions League or in Europe in general. And that will be enough to drive him on to being the manager next season if clubs actually came in with offers, which is there's a lot of ifs and buts there. I very much think Ange will be Celtic manager next season, and it could be very exciting. But then there's also football. The reality of football is that Ange might be there, but someone might come in for Jota, someone might come in for Carter Vickers, Starfelt, Hatate. It's as much as we can look forward to phase 3 now because things are going so well. I'm not trying to put a dampener on things. I'm just saying the reality of football, and I've worked in football, and you have as well. You understand the reality of football, and things can change very quickly. You lose this couple of your players that are the spine of your team. Others might leave. You can't bring in the replacement you wanted to bring in, or it could have happened late in the transfer window, and so you start getting desperate. That's the amount of times that happens in football. It's very common. So yeah, there's a lot of things have to remain for Celtic to go and kick on and make phase 3 what all Celtic fans would hope it is. But with Ange there, and with the way that Celtic are operating right now, there's a lot of faith that even if you do lose a player, they'll bring someone else in who could just hit the ground running. So I think there's a lot more trust that Celtic fans have. I don't know if you think this as well. I think everyone's quite relaxed about it. And I think that's probably why everyone is optimistic and looking ahead to next season about what they could achieve in Europe, because there's a lot of trust in what Celtic are doing right now and how they're operating.
Yeah, I don't think we've had this much trust in, like, that kind of ability to move from one player to another. Like, if we did sell like somebody for big money, like we've done in the last couple of windows, that whoever he gets, like, cool, never heard of him, not a problem. As long as he picked him, that's fine by me, So, and I'm with you all the way. And that probably takes us on to the last part of the podcast, Anthony, because like the only thing that's kind of left for us to touch on is the preview for the weekend. We've got Kilmarnock. I don't think we're going to see many changes. Ange's kind of quoted already as saying, like, if you weren't at the game last weekend against Rangers, like Hatate, for example, you're probably not going to play the Kilmarnock game. So I don't think he's going to see it as, he definitely doesn't see it as job done for the league like we do, perhaps. So it should be copy and paste a similar team in full strength against Kelly, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think so. I think Celtic will just kick on now and just get it over the line. I don't think there'll be too much stumbling. The domestic form has just been amazing. One bad game, that's all it's been. One poor performance and result against St Mirren, and otherwise everything's been pretty much plain sailing in the league, and I don't expect that to change for Celtic. I expect Ange doesn't seem to like to rotate too much. So yeah, I think it'll be a similar team until there needs to be a change for an injury or a player off form. I think in terms of for what fans' focus is on now is perhaps getting over the line, and also this semi-final that's coming up at the end of the month. They need to be in a good place for that. So I think Celtic will take care of Kelly on Sunday.
Yeah, and Kelly away is actually one of the other games this season where we've got scored more than 4. The first time we went to Rugby Park, we won 5-0. For anyone that doesn't recall the game, that's one where Jens gets the beautiful goal, then gets injured, and then Starfelt returns from injury to score. And yeah, it was quite an action-packed game. The last time we played Kelly was at Celtic Park. We also won 2-0 on that day. Must be said, the front three in both fixtures has been the same. There was the front three that played at the weekend, Jota, Kyogo, Maeda. And yeah, that's 2 clean sheets on the bounce against Kelly. I probably just jinxed that, so sorry everyone. But yeah, I think it'll be very much like you say. It's just going to be that front three will probably go again. Jota, Maeda, Kyogo. I think O'Reilly probably keeps his place in midfield with McGregor. I would probably expect to see Iwata come in over Moy. I just really feel that game was not Moy's, and Iwata now. Iwata is also one of Ange's guys as well. Like he knows and is brought in deliberately, specifically that individual player. Maybe a wee moment for Iwata, but the back four probably doesn't change either. But I think it's definitely a good team to take down at Rugby Park, to dominate possession and try and break through the lines.
Yeah, Iwata, I really like watching Iwata play, and I know I haven't seen too much of him, but when we have, he does seem to be like almost similar to how McGregor would play that deeper role as well. He just dictates play. He can win the ball back. He's got a bit about him to win tackles, and he can pick out a lovely pass, and his vision's great as well. And that's what we're seeing of him so far. And I do enjoy seeing him on with Moy. I think we know what we can do, and I think Moy's been a good player for us, but I do enjoy seeing Iwata in that starting lineup just because I want to see more of him, and I want to see what his potential is, I guess, and where he would perhaps fit in the future as a mainstay in the Celtic midfield.
Yeah, we're all kind of interested in that, because we do imagine Iwata becoming a mainstay in this. Like when we signed him, it was like, oh, this is Ange season 2. He's got his guy now from Japan. Maybe, obviously, we're yet to see him. But yeah, I think we're all quite eagerly awaiting, like, how does the master plan work when Iwata gets plugged in properly with Rio, with McGregor, with O'Reilly? How's that all going to work? Moy even in that equation as well. So yeah, I hope he gets to start, and he'll hopefully give us some answers on that as well.
So same with Kobayashi as well.
Yes.
In defence. Is the long term that Kobayashi is going to partner Carter Vickers? Because I do think he's ready. I think from what we've seen of him, he is ready to be part of the first team. and actually start games. I think I've been quite impressed with him. Certainly, the games that he has played. So I do wonder whether the long term is that perhaps he is Starfelt's replacement. But I mean, Starfelt's a great player. I think he's often underrated. And I know he didn't have a great game on Sunday, but I think he's a quality player, and I do know that a lot of Premier League clubs are looking at him as well because they rate him. So
good. I'd like to see Starfelt sold because he's not Carter Vickers. So if we're going to lose one of them, Starfelt's Batman. We'll lose him.
And Kobayashi is a left-sided centre back. So there we go. There's the replacement in before 6 months before perhaps a player leaving. Not that I'm suggesting Starfelt is leaving. I'm just saying there's clubs interested.
Yeah. Oh, the last 2 times we've played, Kelly, it's been 2-0 and 5-0. If I was going to go a score prediction, I'm probably going to go with a 4. Just to call it bang in the middle. I'll go Celtic 4, Kilmarnock 0. Would I get a score prediction out of you, Anthony?
Yeah, I'll probably go with that as well. I think actually, even when a Sunday comes around and it's a Celtic away game, I often put on my bet 4-0 Celtic or something like that. I think 4-0. I think they'll be in flamboyant moods and just will have them grounded and say, look, you won the derby. You're going to have to put in a performance here. And I think
that's for nothing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Totally. I hope everyone attending the game has fun, travels safe. Everyone watching the game, obviously, good luck. Wish the Hoops well. Anthony, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast, mate. Thanks very much for taking time out your schedule to come and join us. It means a lot.
No, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Excellent. Hail, everyone. Catch you next one.